BSing with who? BSing with what? BSing with Sean K. BSing with who? BSing with what? BSing with Sean K. BSing with who? BSing with what? BSing with Sean K. BSing with
Hello, welcome to another episode of BSing with Sean K. I'm your host, Sean Kneese, and on this show I talk with people who live outside the box and provide a platform for opinions not often heard in the mainstream media, and this is episode 95. And on this episode, I'm going to play you a conversation I had with Joseph Mauricio. And he is an author, teacher, speaker, coach, and comedian. And his comedian name is Joey Slades. And I saw him perform at Viviana Duncan's Dark Reality Open Mic, which I've mentioned in earlier episodes of this podcast. And I wrote a podcast newsletter on Dark Reality Open Mic in New York City, which is like a very raw, uncensored, anything goes open mic that Viviana Duncan, who's a poet, set up, and I interviewed Viviana Duncan for episode 57 of this podcast, and yeah, I saw him perform at her open mic, and he talked a lot about depression and a lot of darker things he was going through, and I guess using humor to cope with some of that. And we talk about using humor to cope with depression, or comedy to cope with depression and anxiety in the episode. And also he teaches meditation, and he talks about his interest in spirituality and meditation and Buddhism in the interview, and also how when he teaches meditation, he gets people he helps people cope with anxiety, depression, and other mental health issues. But yeah, anyway, here's the conversation, and I hope you enjoy it. Okay. So, this is BSing with Sean K, bullshitting with Sean Kneese, and bullshitting with me today is Joseph Mauricio.
That's right. Yeah.
And I'll let you introduce yourself. I know you have a lot of things you do.
I do a number of different things. And I actually perform comedy, which is where we know each other, under the name Joey Slade, which in itself is a kind of a cool story. I'm otherwise a meditation teacher, a Buddhist chaplain actually, and also run kind of meditation groups. And my orientation is to try to reach people who are not your standard meditation community, which is to say not the really tight yoga pants, love and light, rainbows, and unicorn people, but actually real people with issues and problems and stuff. I'm also a life coach, and I found that meditation could be used to really, in a transformative way, not just a chill out way, but to actually work with problems and issues we have, which is what my comedy is as well.
Like mental health issues.
I think so, yeah.
And so you say you use a different name for your stand-up. Is that because you want to keep the two worlds separate, like what you say in your stand-up and what?
Well, if we have a second, can I tell you the story of the name? Yeah, I was doing open mics at one point. I had a little bit of cash, and I decided to pay myself to not work and just spent all my time writing comedy and doing and doing open mics as much as I can for like 2 months. I could afford 2 months in the city, and I just did that. And what was happening is, my name is Mauricio. It's complicated, and a lot of people just freak out on it or say it wrong. And when you're doing open mics, these people never see you again. Nobody's heard of you particularly. And, the poor MC is standing up there going, my next guest, his name, right? So I started using various pseudonyms that were easy to pronounce and easy to write, and that would actually stand out on a list, And So one was Joey Spade, as in Sam Spade. It was kind of a little homage. But then he still screwed it up. And he said Joey Slade. And what he said was, I've never heard of this guy, but I love his name. Joey Slade. And I was like, bingo, that's it. And actually, Joey Slade got written up in New York Magazine. And I had been doing comedy off and on for years and never really got any press to speak of. And my mom, I remember at the time, said, I think Joey's going to have the career you've always wanted. You should follow it. So I just started using it, and Viviana, who runs
the Stark Reality.
Yeah, Stark Reality open mic. She really loved the name, and so I just started using it regularly. People to this day that know me, particularly through Viviana or the Art Star community or a couple of other different arts communities that I performed in, know me as Joey. They don't even know my other full name. They're just like, Joey, how are you?
I remember your set was kind of I guess cathartic in a way, like you were talking about depression a lot, and like a lot of dark subject matter, and it was I guess that's been a way for you to kind of cope with things. You have a different orientations for that kind of thing, both in comedy and also in the meditation communities I've worked in. And the meditation communities I've worked in come from a specific school of Buddhism, which is called Vajrayana Buddhism, which is to say it's about transforming your neurosis into wisdom on the spot or through some process. But it's not about getting rid of your neurosis or being a good person. It's really about looking at your damage, your depression, your difficulty, and getting to know it so much, right? Having it part of you that it becomes kind of a costume that you can take off if you need to, or just use when you need to, if that makes sense. And that's kind of what happens in the comedy. So my ideal situation in comedy, if I have the time, and Sean, to be honest, if I'm doing 5 minutes at the Gotham Comedy Club, I don't have the time for that. Yeah.
I guess got to do joke. But if I have the time, like Viviana has given me this feature every month to work on material for a one-person show, and if I have the time, the ideal thing would be to lead people through some kind of a catharsis together.
Like stuff they might be going through, or
yeah. And the cool thing about comedy is it becomes instantly accessible and universal. So I could talk about my stuff, and you could translate it to your stuff, even though it's not the same stuff. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I know. You like
universality in it.
Might not be like the same exact thing, but maybe like you felt like, because I've definitely like some of the stuff you were saying in the set, like I could relate to like feeling like some of the stuff you were talking about at times, but I feel like you were, but even though I feel like you were talking more about like maybe a more like a clinical depression. I mean, I know there's like a difference, like if you have a biochemical depression or like when people just get in moods, it's like anybody can go through a depression, I guess, but then.
I mean, for me it had a significant impact on my life. But to what degree it was chemical or not, I don't know. I had a doctor prescribe mood alterants, Prozac in particular, and then I had him adjust it because I can't do anything without researching the heck out of it. So I learned a lot of stuff. So I also paired it with Wellbutrin, which is the dopamine precursor. So serotonin and dopamine. And it put me in a good spot, in a good place, a productive situation. But I actually had the idea that I was trying to teach my brain where I wanted it to be, but I didn't want to keep using the drugs. And I got off them at some point. I'm a big druggie in my past, so I have I'm very cavalier about it, and I just dropped it. I didn't even step down, which was crazy. So I went into a bit of a tailspin, but it evened out, and now I'm just working with it straight with meditation. I do have a situation where, I'll be honest with you, if I'm not performing, writing, if I'm not creative, I will begin to become depressed. which is interesting. And I wonder how many people out there are that way without realizing that. Because people tend to get very practical. Well, I don't make enough money, and I'm not doing enough sit-ups, and all of these things that they think they have to fix about themselves. There's an old saying, which is it's a bit of a trope or a meme almost, like, and it's a cliche anyway, a Facebook thing. I'm sure you've seen it or maybe heard it, but where it's like when we become depressed in our culture, a doctor prescribes drugs. But in indigenous cultures, you'd go to the medicine man, and the medicine man would say, when did you stop dancing? When did you stop singing? When did you stop becoming a creative, compassionate human being? And they'd see it completely different. And in some ways, we see it ass backwards. We try to stuff the symptoms and take care of the symptoms without ever looking at how we're robbing ourselves spiritually, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so you're talking about like using art as a catharsis or an
Absolutely,
outlet.
yeah.
And if you don't have that
at least
outlet,
as an outlet. I mean, when you say catharsis, it sounds like you're talking about really some kind of a dramatic cure, if you will, or remedy. And it's not always that. Sometimes just going out dancing, But it at least creates the creative space in your heart and mind that you could kind of like yourself.
Yeah.
Despite the little shadows that might.
Yeah. Well, like I definitely I've been doing like a lot of these podcasts, and I've been like writing more like spoken word piece and doing music, and like I think like I don't know. I definitely feel better like doing a lot more like creative stuff regularly. So I think I get what you're saying. Like
it creates some kind of space in the. I don't want to say the soul. Well, in the soul, I guess, whatever that is. But, some kind of internal space that we, and if you're good, if there's something that you've become reasonably good at, it's a confidence booster,
So you think like sometimes like the medications that are prescribed like don't always work, or like.
Well, I wanted to put this disclaimer in there because there are people probably and hopefully a lot of people will listen to this, or even that hear my work or your work and come across the board that actually need the medication. Yeah. That actually have really serious debilitating depression. I've got a bit of a wet rag that hangs over me. And I have sometimes considered that a big problem, and I have found that considering it a big problem doesn't help me. If that makes any sense. Yeah,
like making it like a part of your identity.
Like I'm a depressed person, or I have to do this or that. And the fact is I'm a lot more than that. That's one thing that's kept me a little bit hunkered down, kept my life truncated, smaller than it needs to be. But I'm trying to work with it, and I am working with it. It's actually a developmental process, and I like it. But it also, if you're not depressed a little bit, then I don't think you're paying attention. Because depression is a completely reasonable reaction to the way the world is.
Yeah. Then you're kind of like, I guess, living in a bubble. Just
people frequently ask me, who are my heroes, etc., in comedy particularly and performance, and I have always tended toward the dark side. The dark comics have been my heroes, from Lenny Bruce, Richard Pryor, Bill Hicks. Is like my Jesus Christ in a way, these are the sort of guideposts of my world in a way, my creative world. But people will, alternatively suggest really balanced comedians, who are actually, and I just don't have a feel for them. I'd have to admit Seinfeld is brilliant, but I just don't, it doesn't excite me, because he's not damaged enough. Right? He's just too successful and normal, Adam Sandler.
You just don't find it as relatable, I guess? Or?
Yeah, maybe that's it. And I think it may be slightly a different language. Like we accept these things in music. Some people, if they listen to heavy music, it's understandable that they're not going to like, light music or pop music or something like that, But with comedy, I think comedy has its own strains, its own little languages, if you will. And it doesn't mean that one is bad or one is better than another. It just means the stuff that attracts me is dangerous.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, going in uncomfortable places, or like dealing with like stuff something that's negative and turning it into something that's positive rather than just being.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was initially an actor, and before it got into comedy itself. Although there was a great comedy group in my college. I went to Emerson, now university, but Emerson College, and we had the Emerson Comedy Workshop, ECW, and Dennis Leary and a number of people, Mario Cantone from Sex and the City, and it really put out a lot of, and more behind the scenes, Richard LaGravenese and people that actually wrote and are now writers in film and producers and stuff. There was a lot of talent that came through that little community and that little group. But it was, I was trained as an actor and a director of theater, straight theater. And ironically, I had kind of a little attitude about it. I thought theater was the thing and comedy was kind of a low form. Never really realized to the extent of real transformative work that some of these people like Pryor and Bill Hicks and Richard, George Carlin, a number of people that really put stuff out there and make a difference in the world. God knows who would have known what Jon Stewart wrought. And now, you've got all of these comedians actually changing public opinion. So it's really come into its own as a real kind of a modern art form, and I think an important art form. And for me, everything I wanted to do in theater, I can do by myself on stage in front of a mic. There was one theater person who existed in the 1920s that I studied a lot, and I was quite taken with his ideas. And his name was Antonin Artaud. People that really seriously know theater, dramaturges, etc., would know him. And he had something called the Theater of Cruelty. He was also clinically depressed, maybe even more than that, maybe even schizophrenic or something. He had issues, psychological issues, but he was really brilliant. And what he tried to do was create a spectacle on stage that was really violent, really overwhelming, and actually led an audience to the word you've used, catharsis. That was, his point, the point of his theater. And he often used huge puppets, huge noises and sounds. This is before a lot of too much electronic stuff. I think they had.
What era was
in
this?
The 20s.
20s, okay.
And but he would create, put whole orchestras on stage with giant drums and things like that to create these overwhelming spectacles that would just blow people away. And the whole idea was for them to get out of the constraints that they held themselves back with and experience the sort of real openness and explosiveness of their own spirit, if you will, right?
Like kind of letting themselves out, like
That's
the real
right.
self, yeah.
Yeah. And it was very threatening to the status quo, and they eventually locked him up, I think they locked him up several times, and then people came to his aid, and they got him out, but he ultimately didn't have a really rewarding career because he was too upsetting to the status quo and stuff. But his ideas have stayed very much in the world of theater as a kind of an underpinning for what in the 60s became kind of like real social theater, living theater and the open theater, and these different theaters that were very confrontational and not really about theater, but more about performance. And that is the beginning of my lineage. That's what I'm the most excited about. It's kind of where theater and heavy metal music and rock and roll all together, they all come together on this point, It's
just like kind of like the rawness or
the rawness, and the possible explosiveness and the slight danger of it, And I don't mean danger in the sense that people could get hurt, but sometimes things are dangerous and you don't even know.
Yeah, I've heard
nobody's
people
really
say
gonna
like
get hurt, but
Yeah, and I've heard people say like comedy's like the last art form for that in a way, kind of like where anything, you can go in like dangerous places and stuff.
That's right. And I think it can be co-opted by a societal aspect that, if you will, I don't know the word I'm using for, but a convention, right? Conventional thing, and that eventually will clean everything up and take away the sharp edges and make everything safe again, right? So then, the dangerous comic can't be ignored, so he gets a sitcom and, and a laugh track, and it's all okay. The dangerous heavy metal guys become Metallica, who are now middle-aged guys that have families and...
There was kind of like, I don't know if you ever heard of a show called Black Mirror. It's like on Netflix. There was like an episode of Black Mirror that kind of
of course. I'm a rabid fan. Yeah.
Oh yeah. You know the second episode where they're on the bikes. And then like the one main character.
Credits.
He speaks out against like the whole system that they're in, and then it ends with them like giving him his own show where he speaks out against the system.
Which is how brilliant from the point of view of human psychology, it is kind of the way our ego works, because we will get this ego system that will make everything smooth and socially acceptable, but a part of us inside will fall in love and everything falls apart, But then the ego comes back in, and again, and we're no longer banging this person we love, 4 times a day. We're, sitting there not sleeping with them and mowing the lawn or whatever, right?
Yeah.
So there's always that, stasis and change. This idea that we kind of go back behind the cocoon, if you will, and protect ourselves, but I think we have to burst butterfly forth and really tear out there sometimes, Yeah.
So I guess it's about finding a balance with that. Like maybe there's a need for both.
I think so.
Yeah.
And I definitely think that balance is important, because just to tear yourself out constantly is ridiculous. It's just suicide. It's also counterproductive to creativity, Like people who do too many drugs or just,
Yeah. You have to, I guess, kind of like explode to then come back together again.
That's right. Yeah. I'm a real advocate in terms of performance of sobriety. I'm personally sober. I don't have any judgments about people who aren't. I have really good friends, and I still go out and hang out with them, but it has never helped my creativity, drugs at all. I did lots of drugs. And I think it helped get me out of the small-minded paradigm of just trying to be a, regular good kid in high school or something. And, it woke me up to a lot of things in the world and also in the universe that I wouldn't have even thought about. But at some point it's counterproductive, and you really need your wits about you to do transformative work on stage, I think you've really got to be present. Otherwise you're just, jerking off.
Yeah.
Can I say that?
Yeah, we can. Yeah, I mean it's kind of like it's not really like a censored show, so.
Yeah.
But so I guess that's what you do, like in not only in the comedy but the meditation groups you hold, is like keeping people present to kind of escape, because I guess when you're depressed you're kind of in your head, like kind of self-flagellating.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
But I'd be careful of the word escape, because in a way that's what we're doing when we're in our head, believe it or not. It seems like we're being oppressed by ourselves, but actually it's confronting that I think is the transformative way about it. Like using meditation to escape the pain of life and go to your little quiet, beautiful place. Is like, going to Vegas and listening to soft rock or whatever, It's fine. It's music. It's not transformative. It's not really going to address the issue. And I think if somebody's got something really harsh going on inside, there might be something in there that needs voice. Does that make sense?
Yeah, like giving a voice to that darkness, not just ignore it.
That's right. Yeah, there's something beautiful could be in there. I think of that. Like I have this image of a black orchid I've been writing about. It's an idea that inside all the stuff you don't want to see, you don't want people to see, you're embarrassed about, might be actually quite beautiful and maybe could actually find a voice that's actually quite elegant and lovely.
Like using it for something productive.
Yeah.
Like rather than avoiding a part of yourself or trying to not acknowledge it. Like, yeah. So you think there's too much focus on like being positive in spiritual communities
absolutely. It's like spiritual bypassing. Have you ever heard that term?
I haven't.
Yeah.
But I think
you're just getting all zenned out, and it's kind of like.
But I guess you don't think that's something you can really maintain, or like you could really.
I don't think so. But even for me, it's not a real state, so I wouldn't even want to maintain it. It's a bit like. I'm of the generation, I remember that Clockwork Orange, there was this fear of over-medication and lobotomization, but we can do that to ourselves. We could turn ourselves into little robots that never feel any pain, and I'm not sure that that's preferable, really, to being depressed occasionally or, maybe preferable to people that have really debilitating mental illness. But for people that suffer from depression as kind of a regular part of their cycle, but still move out of that cycle occasionally, I think really learning to work with it and give it voice and express it is a much more creative and, reasonable way to work with that.
Yeah, rather than just discarding it altogether. Yeah.
Did you ever, this is before your time, but there was, I'm sure you've seen Annie Hall.
I know about it, I don't know if I ever actually watched it, but
There's a scene in it, and this is brilliant, where Woody Allen is talking to the camera, his favorite device, to sit there and bitch to the camera. And he's on a street, and he's talking to the camera about how neurotic he is and how his relationships are always complicated, and he sees a couple on the street that look really good looking and happy. And he goes, like these people, what do they have that I don't have, And he goes, let's ask them. And he goes up to them to interview them, and they're really good looking LA kind of people, He's got a sweater over his shoulders perhaps. I don't quite remember, and she's gorgeous with big sunglasses. And he said, you look so happy. And they like, we are. He goes, what's your secret? And they just sat there and blinked for a second, and then she said, we're incredibly vapid people. He goes, yeah, we're really shallow. We don't have any real deep ideas, right? And that was a kind of brilliant moment. It was really lovely. And I've misquoted it, that's paraphrased, but essentially that was the idea, that people that appear to have it together might be a little bit in denial or a bit of a clamp down going on.
Yeah, and another thing just came to me. It's like, how could you be that much of an empathetic or compassionate person if you never feel down or depressed? Because if you're empathetic, then you're able to like empathize with other people and like what they're going through, or like if it's just happy all the time, then you're not really looking at like the world or like anybody else who might be having like a worse time than you, or you're not empathizing or like feeling compassion. I feel like if you're a real compassionate person, you would get down a lot. Like if you have a big heart and you're empathetic, like
I think it's way more human to work with sadness and occasional depression than to not have those things in your life,
like I think even some new age people, like they don't want to even know about like bad stuff going on in the world. It's like, but isn't like, I think how is that even like spiritual? That's just kind of like living, like to be real spiritual. Like I think you should be able to like face like the darkness too, and like kind of, I guess, find a way. Because like, how do you ever make the world better? How do you ever like, you know?
It's like you got two really good-looking, gorgeous faces on these huge, disgusting blobs of undulating form, and these faces going, "I'm good. How are you? I'm good. How are you?"
Is one of the things, because I know meditation is also kind of like observing your thoughts. Is that something you do? Like, kind of, does that help people like not be as like not let the depression or anxiety like rule you as much, because you're kind of observing the depression and anxiety
when you can, you know? It's sometimes the neurosis, whatever it is, neurosis meaning anything that isn't an effective strategy to get what you really want or satisfy your needs, right? Or neurosis is all the stuff we do that doesn't help. We think it helps, but it doesn't help, you know? So constantly licking our wounds or whatever our version of that is, over drinking, over loving, whatever it is. And, you know, having that kind of craziness in our world is reasonable. But to be able to see it is huge. To fix it means that we're not really looking at it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So it's like almost like if you try to fix it too quickly, which is another thing I think way meditation communities go wrong, because it's like it shouldn't be there, so we should fix it. So either there's complete denial, or else it's like, well, how could we fix it? Yeah. And it's kind of like, well, maybe it just needs to be seen first. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah, like acknowledge, accept it, kind of.
Right.
Yeah.
Like really see it, because we're so quick to judge, and we're so quick to categorize, you know, to put that thought in this negative place, that maybe we never listen to that voice. And, well, why would I want to listen to it? That's an evil voice. Well,
like
you know
a super positive person might say, like, "Ooh, I don't want to. Those people in that metal band, they're negative."
It's like, well, maybe, but your kids are listening to that.
Yeah.
And loving that.
Yeah.
And
So
hating,
maybe try to
and
understand.
hating you, because there's something it's out of balance. There's something that's not being addressed about being human here. And being human is a fucking difficult situation. It's really complicated. It's really deep. And it often doesn't make sense in a lot of ways. So meditation, as you were saying, is like watching your thoughts. But I have to say, sometimes those neurotic thoughts and those, I like to call them toxic psychologies or philosophies that we have, are really compelling. They're like catch us before we know it. And once you're sucked inside of one, you can't see it anymore. Does that make sense? You're like in it. So all of a sudden you're like, this guy's an asshole, and I've got to work this through, and these are all the way, you know, and you're not really even conscious that you're driving off the road, you know?
Like you let it rule you, you mean?
That's right. Yeah. You get sucked up inside it. So meditation is really training to recognize that, and to begin to develop the actual strength to be able to disengage, at least just momentarily, so these things don't rule us, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Like kind of accepting it and letting it be there, but also being able to separate yourself from it too.
That's right. Yeah. It's like, you know, when you're watching the clouds in the sky, you could identify with the clouds. You could either get stuck in there and going, wow, that looks like a dragon. I think it's a dragon. I think it's speaking to me. You know what I mean? Yeah. Or you could look back and go, oh, there's one that looks like a dragon and one that looks like a rabbit, and they're all shifting and changing, and right? And because you're identifying with the sky instead of the clouds, you're identifying with the wisdom or the space instead of all the neurotic thoughts. The neurotic thoughts are always there, and they get more apparent and more neurotic the more we stare at them and try to work with them or fight them. But if we could learn to just distance ourselves and accept these things about ourselves, we actually might learn a lot about who we are.
Like understand, why did I think that? Like,
maybe, you know.
Like be our own psychologist, kind of.
Yeah, I would say in a more, or our own good friend.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Right? Because even psychologists have their limitations because they might overthink things.
Yeah.
Or, you know.
And one, they're trying to see like a label, I guess.
Yeah, that's right. And somehow that's still trying to fix something, maybe. But maybe just learn how to be someone that could listen to ourselves. Be there. Like, what if you became that person that you've hoped someone else would be? Someone that gets your poetry, someone that gets your jokes, someone that understands you, someone that knows how to lift you up when you're feeling bad. And I believe that we could be that for ourselves.
Yeah. And I think a lot of
You
times,
know?
I said this in a recent episode because I interviewed someone who was a comedian and a psychologist, so we got into, but he also, like, I think people are sometimes like harder on themselves than they would be like on other people, or they would be on a friend. Like, we're our harshest critic.
Oh,
sometimes.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And we don't give ourselves space. There's another thing which meditation helps with, is space. Giving yourself a little bit of room to breathe and all this. We just see something and we're already on it, you know. Whereas with another person, we might see the context a little bit or understand that they're acting out because they're pressured. We don't see that for us, you know. We just go, there I am eating pizza again. Here I fucking peg. You know what I mean? And it's like, well, maybe there's a little kid in there that needs comforting, and maybe if you could listen to that little kid, you could find a better way than pizza to comfort him. You know? But just this idea of you can't eat pizza anymore because you're fat, it's just not a motivator. It doesn't really.
It's like a negative, like.
That's right. Yeah.
And did so like has this? I guess this is, you're still kind of learning this all yourself. Like, obviously I guess like when you first started with this, like you've come a long way. Like, is there still like areas you're trying to improve?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. You can't. And I would tweak the language a little bit and say areas that I want to understand, you know. I mean, again, improving kind of indicates that you're unhappy about something.
Yeah.
And you're trying to fix it. And yes, that is always, we always have that, and I have those things. But you can't really fix anything by trying to fix it. I don't know.
Yeah, you have to accept it for it to truly change.
Yeah. Here's the key to that. If I'm not just pontificating too much.
Oh, no.
But the key to that is that everything changes, right?
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, nothing doesn't change ultimately. So all we have to do is let it change, right?
Yeah.
What happens is if there's something about you don't like, you hate it. So either you repress it, you bury it, you don't look at it, or else you try to fix it by fighting it. And that only makes it stronger, right?
Yeah.
The more you fight something, the stronger it gets.
Yeah, the more you resist, the more.
Yeah, I had this real weird neurotic pattern in relationships at one point, and I would argue and fight with the people I supposedly loved, you know. And my typical MO is I would find a woman attractive and feel like I couldn't in any way match up to her, and then somehow it might even happen and it fall in, and then all of a sudden I would be a great boyfriend, like the best boyfriend, for about a month, 2 months, and then something would click inside that they were seeing into me too much or something like that, you know. And there'd be this like little struggle, and I'd want to get away because that was my pattern. I wanted something, and once I had it, I wanted to get away from it.
So I guess what was a part of that, like maybe there were parts of yourself you didn't accept yet, and you were afraid of. And once you started to get closer to them, it was like
all because I didn't want to see myself.
Yeah.
Right? Because as you get closer to someone else, you see more of you. They see more of you. But what would happen is every time I would fight with them to try to get away, it would bring us closer together. It was a classic neurotic codependent relationship, right? So I would be in these relationships that I didn't even want to be in anymore. First of all, I wanted them, and then I didn't want them, and then I wanted to get away, and the more I fought, the closer we get, right?
Yeah.
And it would be crazy, and at some point I was like, I'll never be able to have a relationship. Well, that's going back 20 years now, because with meditation in time, you start to see those patterns, and here's the brilliant thing. The wounds, the damage is still under there, I think, in a lot of cases. Maybe that heals in time. But what starts to happen is you start to realize how neurotic your means of trying to take care of those wounds are, right?
Yeah.
You're only making it worse, not better. And what starts to happen is you start to see it before you do it, or even as you do it. That's really galling. Sitting there going, picking up a drink that you said you weren't going to drink anymore, and seeing it happen.
Yeah.
Like not just blacking out and going, how did I do that? But actually being there for it. And the next stage, of course, is to see it before it happens. And then you could kind of redirect the energy somewhere more creative.
So you're saying like that comes from not saying, oh, I'm going to change this about myself, I want to improve this. It comes from just acknowledging.
Seeing it and getting sick of it. So, and this is, again, the improving thing could work in other circumstances. But from a meditation point of view, they call it wearing out an old shoe. You basically see it and see it and see it until you just don't have it in you to keep doing it, Yeah. Here I am fighting with somebody again because I don't want to see myself, right? Yeah. You just start to understand it.
And how did you first how did you become exposed to like Buddhism and like Eastern thought and meditation?
Well, I was doing comedy, well, first of all, very first was in college, because we were just exposed to different forms of being and physical things, and we had teachers who had studied with another great theoretician, Jerzy Grotowski, who is kind of transformed theater in the 60s with this physical aspect to everything and really primal thing. And I was fortunate enough to work with a couple of people that worked with him. He didn't work with a lot of people. And they were very into kind of meditation in its movement states. Movement is meditation, really going into meditative places and studying dance forms like Balinese dance and stuff, which are very much meditation. So I got exposed to those in my actor training. But it was years later, I was managing a comedy club in Greenwich Village. This was probably my closest brush with fame, because it was at a time when comedy was just starting to blow up, explode. And I was running the club in the area that is dominated by NYU, just one block south of Washington Square Park. It was the Paper Moon Cabaret. And it was a beautiful room. I saw the room walking down the street, and I was like, I know theater spaces. I'm a director and stuff, or I was at the time, and I was like, I want to do something in that space. So I actually started flipping burgers and pouring beers just to be in there. Yeah. And finally got them to give me a night, and I called up a bunch of people from Emerson, got them down. Mario Cantone was the headliner, and we got a few people. Colin Quinn, actually, wasn't someone I knew in college, but he was someone that came in. We held auditions, and he became a regular in our show. And Adam Sandler came down, and Dennis Leary, who was from Emerson, and we knew, and Eddie Brill, who was the new talent guy for Leno and Letterman, both at different times. So these guys all went on to great careers and kind of interesting things and stuff like that. And it was a vibrant little crew. And I was like the manager of it. I kind of hired everybody and kind of scheduled everything and did everything. And was frustrated because I couldn't perform because the show got so successful I wasn't good enough to be in it. Because I hadn't learned really that much how to do stand-up yet. Mm-hmm. It was kind of straight stand-up. Turns out, looking at it now, where I am now, I easily could have worked in. I have equal amount of talent, and I just didn't believe in myself in that way, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So I was really unhappy. Everybody else was starting to get successful. The thing was taking off, and people were going, wow, this is so wonderful. And, and I was really unhappy. And there was a little bit of white powder involved in my life at that time, a little cocaine. And that skews your point of view a lot. It's crazy, It's kind of how your brain alters itself with that kind of drug, and it wasn't even enjoyable. It was just a way that we told each other we loved each other, Come in the bathroom, I'm gonna give you a little, like this thing, and that's how you felt loved when people gave you little bumps of cocaine, It made me crazy, and it's not what I went into the theater for in the first place. It was the opposite. So my girlfriend at the time had a teacher who was a Buddhist, and I called him up. He turned me on Wendell Beavers, and he turned me on to this meditation community, the Shambhala meditation community. It had a real kind of a vibrant community in New York in those days, and I got involved in that, and very early on decided to leave and just turn my back on the comedy thing, which I honestly, tell you the truth, never know if I just shot myself in the, or if, some people are like, that's so brave of you. And I'm like, or stupid, I don't know, or childish, but I dropped out and I moved to a meditation community up in the mountains in Colorado, and fell in love with it, and fell in love with meditation, and fell in love with the idea that all the things that kind of motivate us are not the things we think we're looking for, if that makes sense.
It doesn't give you fulfillment, in the long term.
Like even in coaching, like we have a credo in coaching that money doesn't motivate people. It freaks them out. They become obsessed about it. They come to coaches to try to make more money, but it doesn't motivate you because it doesn't speak to your animal human spirit, right?
Well, a lot of it's like society saying you should make more money, you should want to be the multi-millionaire, you should want to.
You should.
Yeah.
And those shoulds all land like weights that just block us.
And then even merging it into spirituality with stuff like The Secret.
Yeah, and there is wisdom to that. I mean, there is some logic to the idea that you can attract the things in life that you need.
Well, those are older ideas too, from I think it comes from Hermeticism, the whole idea of what you creating your own reality and attracting what you want.
Yeah. I once heard it said that, I forgot who said this, but I once heard it said that we're always creating something.
Yeah.
Right? So we're walking down the street thinking, I'm a schmuck, I'm a loser, and that's what we're creating, that world around that. So I definitely believe that. And that you could kind of redirect that toward creating the things you want. But here's the key, and this is what the Secret forgets, or doesn't get to somehow, is that we can't just go, oh, I want more money, so let me imagine, because maybe we actually don't really want more money. Maybe that's meaningless to a part of ourselves, right?
Yeah.
That part of the process is to begin to uncover who we are and what we actually want, not just the shoulds that you pointed out that society says, right?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I guess the wants would be more the stuff you're willing to do without money.
Yeah.
I don't know, performing stand-up, a lot of times, you don't always get paid doing that. Or you could play shows with a band and doesn't, or even doing this, I'm not, making money to come in here and do interviews, but I like doing it. So.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
And, to be able to judge this by, what you don't have, it kind of robs you of whatever beautiful thing this is.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It was the same thing, those shows I do at Viviana's. I've worked in her communities, for however long she's been doing them, since '87, I think. during that time, I had a lot of resentments. Not to her, but just like, what the fuck am I doing? I don't know. I'm doing an open mic, And yet, there was another community, Reverend Jen Miller and Faceboy, and they had a group, and my buddy, close friend, Robert Pritchard, who had Surf Reality. And this was all in the 90s and early 2000s. They had these art star communities. They called themselves art stars. And they would perform at the open mics at like the Bowery Poetry Club and Collective Unconscious in different places, and Surf Reality Theater, which was Rob's. And it was really amazing, because if you were sitting there, nobody got paid.
Yeah.
In fact, everybody was supposed to chip in to cover the rental, $5, like at Viviana's, or something. But it opened me up creatively. All of a sudden, there were people actually listening to what you had to say, as opposed to comedy clubs where you're yelling to get your point across, and nobody's really paying attention unless you grab them. And I made some good money here and there in comedy, or mostly being hired to particular gigs, but there was nothing as rewarding as these, I don't even want to call them open mics, they're more like, artist community workshops, like the Viviana has. Really is instrumental for people finding their voice. And if you're sitting there worried about how it's not, as your career is on hold, then you miss the beauty of it.
Right? And I guess it's something more permanent too, or
I think so.
Yeah.
And that's really where our mental health comes in, And it's possible that some people do commit suicide, or just don't have, or drug addiction where they die, or just destroy their lives, or after becoming very successful, are because the success has robbed them of something spiritually that they needed.
Yeah.
Now I'm ready for success to rob me of whatever it wants. Because, that would be a nice change in my life. That would be a new thing, and that would be great. So I'm not poo-pooing it. I'm just saying it's not really the answer. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. It's really not the thing that brings real happiness.
Yeah, because if you're just choosing, if the goal is like the only thing, like of success is the only thing in your mind, then once you get it, it's like, okay, where do I go from here?
That's right.
Yeah. Like you can, I guess, enjoy you have to enjoy like the moment of what you're doing. Like, and then the success it comes secondary, but that's not the main thing that's making you happy.
And I think that's another little issue with the secret and that kind of thing. Is it's never a direct thing like, I want this, so therefore I get it. It's more like, if you open your heart to what's really transformative and important for you, then all the other things might come into play.
Yeah, so do you believe in like enlightenment or anything like that? Or?
Well, I think I like it as a question. I definitely like, in terms of Buddhism is a non-theistic, they call it.
Yeah.
So it doesn't have a central God figure. Buddha is not a central God figure, just a human that trained himself.
Yeah. There's been more than one Buddha. There was the original Siddhartha Gautama. Yeah. And then there was others later on.
Well, I think even
the heavy set one isn't the original Buddha. That's Buddha. I think that's someone who came.
Hotai,
came a couple hundred years later. And
yeah. And then it sort of, in some traditions, they believe there have been many Buddhas throughout beginningless time, that Siddhartha was the Buddha for this. Buddha's more like, look at how can you wake up? And the idea that you could ultimately wake up completely and without any backsliding is the idea of enlightenment, is like a motivator. I don't know anyone that's achieved that. But I don't know that it's super important, because then it becomes another form of theism. It's like, I'm a god. I was actually, true story, just recently did an intensive meditation retreat at a Zen monastery. Or it was exactly a monastery, but a Zen meditation center in New Mexico. It was wonderful, amazing. And it's so austere. The Zen people are so And they have so many rules. You got to follow them. And I'm a little bit of a pain in the ass around rules, And I was trying, but they'd be like, I'm walking out of step, or I'm clearing my throat. Everything's very specific and particular. And it was actually really kind of cool. And I went in to a meeting with one of the seniors and teachers, and it's very silent, and you kind of bow. And then he looked at me, and there's this silence, and he goes, "This is kind of a pain in the ass, isn't it?" And I go, "What?" And he goes, "This whole thing." Sitting there in silence and walking and stuff. Basically what he was doing was
breaking your pattern, I guess?
Yeah. And he was also seeing it from my point of view. He was voicing exactly what I was thinking. But it was like exactly that. It's like it doesn't have to... It has these forms, so we learn how to get precise with our life and pay attention. But it's not to be good, or that we're going to go to hell if we do it wrong. And the best teachers are ones that will just go, "Fuck this," or you know what I mean, or whatever.
Yeah. Or like be someone you can relate to.
That's right.
Talk to.
And just be, down to earth with your point of view. Yeah.
Any final thoughts?
Yeah, it was that group we were talking about with just yesterday, is that you could say like there are higher and lower forms of spirituality. Maybe you'd even put comedy down in the lower forms, I don't know. Or you could say there's lower forms of comedy. But that the real progressive way of looking at it isn't really that higher is better than lower, and that the idea is to have an integration of all of these things. Integral systems, they're called, or I like to call meditation a comprehensive thing. So you're sitting there in touch with your higher spirituality, and also willing to be fucking horny or angry, right? Because why not be able to work with all of those things?
Yes, be dynamic.
To be dynamic, right? As long as you don't take it out on someone else, right?
Yeah.
Or try to run from it by hurting
and I guess it makes the world more interesting in a way that there's like dynamic to people, rather than like if we all just sat here like, oh, we're all happy, like kumbaya,
If you were given the choice to go see a movie tonight, right? Would you see a movie where nothing happened and everything was really nice and good?
No, you'd see the one with conflict and like different,
right? So you would be like wanting something interesting. Well, maybe you were given that choice before you were born, and maybe you chose the interesting human realm, which is interesting, and painful and creative and difficult, and yet we get here and we try to get away from all the hard edges, and try to go into some kind of Muzak realm or something,
All right. Well, thank you for coming on and doing this interview.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
All right, so that was the conversation, and I hope you enjoyed it. I feel like I said a lot of the things I wanted to say already in the episode, but one thing I wanted to bring up was the reason why I reached out to Joe was because I was in a state like a couple weeks ago where I was feeling depressed, and occasionally I'll feel like that, and I decided to reach out to Joe to talk about, using comedy and meditation as a way to cope with depression and some of the stuff he talked about in his stand-up. But I thought having him on would help uplift me and hopefully uplift people listening. Maybe help people realize, they're not alone, and don't be afraid to reach out. That's about all I have to say for today. I'll leave a link to Joe's website in the description of the episode, and I guess I'll catch you all on the next one.
BSing with
Who?
BSing with
What?
BSing with Sean K. BSing with
Who?
BSing with
What?
BSing with Sean K. BSing with
Who?
BSing with
What?
BSing with Sean K. BSing